Hello and welcome to part 3 in a series of videos that I'm putting out where I break down all the fights taking place at UFC 236 from a betting perspective. Now I've already covered 6 fights on this card in parts 1 and 2 of this video, and those videos also include how I feel about the co-main event and main event matchups between Israel Adesanya and Kelvin Gastelum and Max Holloway and Dustin Poirier. So if you haven't watched those videos yet, I recommend checking them out. You can find a link to both videos in the description below. And in today's video, I'm actually going to be breaking down 4 fights instead of the usual 3, which is the reason why this video is probably going to be a bit longer than the usual ones. The reason why I'm doing 4 fights in this video instead of 3 is because there's 13 fights taking place at UFC 236. So one of these videos was always going to have to be a little bit longer. And I thought that it would be a good idea for me to get this video out now with the 4 fights, because I'm going to London next week for a few days. So I might not have part 4 of this video out until maybe Wednesday or Thursday of next week. I'm actually going to be visiting the Google headquarters in London, and I might vlog it as well. I'm not sure how much they're going to let me record when I'm in there, but if they will let me record when I'm in there, I might put a little vlog together. First time I've ever done anything like that for this channel, and hopefully that'll be pretty cool. I don't know what to expect there, but I am looking forward to seeing how the Big G handles their business. And also don't forget, guys, that if every video that I put out for UFC 236 gets 150 likes per video, I will do that bonus live stream video on fight day for UFC 236, where I go through every single fight on the card and try and find a decent value prop bet for you guys. And if you don't know what a prop bet is, I can show you here. At the moment, not many of the prop bets have been released for this card. The majority of prop bets tend to come out on the day of the fight or the day before the fight at most betting websites. And a prop bet is basically where you can bet on something highly specific to happen. For example, Max Holloway to win by decision. That would be considered a prop bet. So if you want me to do that bonus live stream where I find you a prop bet for every single fight to make betting this card and watching this card more interesting, hit the like button below. And if we get to 150 likes, I will do that live stream 2 or 3 hours before the event. And I will also, in that live stream, be answering all your questions from the live chat that will be a part of that live stream. I don't care how long it's going to take me to answer them. You can ask me anything you want about gambling, bankroll management, MMA, these fights, anything you want at all, and I will take as long as I need to answer every single one of you. But enough of all that stuff. Now that we've got all that out of the way, let's jump into some fight talk. And the first fight that I want to talk about in today's video is going to be Max Griffin against Zalim Imadaev, who is making his UFC debut. And I think I covered this fight in part 1 of these series of videos, but the fight between Randy Costa and Brandon Davis, we're talking about a very inexperienced fighter who was undefeated coming into the UFC, and Randy Costa, and we didn't know too much about him because so many of his past fights have ended so quickly and because they were all against a really low level of opponent. Well, with Zalim Imadaev, we're in pretty much the same position, to be honest with you. He's also undefeated. He does have double the amount of fights that Randy Costa has. Costa only had 4 pro MMA fights. Imadaev has 8. But at the same time, kind of in a similar position. He's also 24 years old. And if we look at his record is extremely padded. And he made his MMA debut against a guy that had a no wins and 2 losses record. Then he fought someone with the same record, no wins, 2 losses. For 2 guys then who made their MMA debut, and I'm actually going to show you some clips from this fight against Dmitry Tuzov in a moment. Then he fought a guy with a pro MMA record of 2 wins and no losses. Then he fought someone again who was making their pro debut. Then he fought Yuri Izatov, who had 9 wins, 8 losses, again a pretty salty record. And then most recently fought Ivan Gluhak, which was the most experienced opponent up until this point in his career, with a pro MMA record of 16-8 and 1 draw. But as you can see, the majority of these fights ended quite quickly. His last 3 fights have all ended very early into the first round. The only fight that has gone into round 3 was this one against Chorsanbiev, but I couldn't find this fight available to watch online, which is really disappointing. I know that a lot of the time you can find these these fights from regional MMA promotions in Russia and Eastern Europe buried on Russian social media sites, and a lot of the time I have a pretty good job. I do a pretty good job of finding the fights, because what I tend to do is I tend to turn the English spelling names of the fighters into Russian, and then I search for basically the Russian name versus the Russian name, and more often than not I can find the majority of fights on Russian social media sites. I can't find this one though, and I would really like to watch it. So if you can find this fight anywhere online, guys, please either let me know in the chat room on my website, or DM me through my website. You can just click my name, just find me in here, DM me, or leave a comment below. I read all your comments. I try to reply to every single person's comment. So if ever you want to get in touch, there's lots of ways that you could do it. But I would love to watch this fight, guys. So if you know where to find it, please let me know. But like I was saying, because the majority of his career has been spent competing against a low level of opponent, and also because the majority of the fights have ended very quickly, it's kind of tough to gauge where he's at. He is pretty much an unknown. Now, there is more footage available on him, so we know a little bit more about Imadaev than we do about Randy Costa. But again, nothing concrete, and let's just jump into showing you some footage of this guy so you can kind of gain some kind of impression of what he's like. So this was Imadaev's last fight against Ivan Gluhak, which was again the guy with a 16-8 record, the most experienced guy that Imadaev has ever fought. And this is a fight that ends very quickly. Here you can see Gluhak actually coming out very aggressively here, coming forward very recklessly, chin up high and exposed, and because of that, Imadaev lands a bomb and puts him to sleep. So that fight ended in, I don't know, less than a minute. Are they going to give us a slow motion replay? I'm not sure. I mean, we can play it back. You can watch it in real time. It literally lasts less than a minute. We don't learn anything about Imadaev here. His opponent comes out very aggressively, walking him down with his chin up high and exposed, winging bombs, and just get caught like you would expect a lot of fighters to get caught if they fought with this style. Look, literally just stand in front of Imadaev, winging hooks. So that literally doesn't tell us anything about Imadaev at all. So then we go on to his next fight. Actually, I might not show. I'll show you. Yeah, let's go into it. Let's do Yuri Izotov next. So this fight against Izotov was his fight before his last fight, and Izotov had a record of 9 wins, 8 losses, so a bit more experience again than the majority of the guys that Imadaev's fought. And what's interesting is, even though this fight ended very early on, it ended within a couple of minutes, I would say that I've basically watched 70% of these fights. Like I said, I couldn't watch this one even though I really wanted to, but I've watched the majority of the others. And what I would say is that even though this fight only lasted 2 minutes, we learn more about Imadaev in this 2 minutes than we learn about him in any of the other fights, to be honest with you. So let's get into it. This is the first round, and straight away I just want to show you that Imadaev does show off very nice takedown defense here. Here we can see that Izotov has shot in well, he hasn't shot in for a takedown here. He's actually shot in and closed the distance and gone straight to the full body lock. Here you can see Izotov has got 2 underhooks in play, and he's trying to connect his hands together here, and we see Imadaev defending the takedown against the cage. Now here, it looks like Izotov has been able to get his hands connected, which puts him in a very strong position to complete this takedown. Imadaev is in a very, very bad position here because he's enabled Izotov to get control of his body. But watch what Imadaev does here, which is very, very nice. When he did get taken down, Izotov was able to do that because Izotov was able to get control of his body. Like I just said a few moments ago, when you get control of your opponent's body, you're able to control their balance and control their body weight, which puts them at big risk of being taken down. But when Imadaev got taken down here, he showed strong hips, good balance, prevented Izotov from being able to chain into another takedown attempt and put him on his back. Imadaev did not accept being on the bottom. So where we've spoken in parts 1 and 2 of this video about the different kinds of takedown defense that you see from guys, we picked some holes in Holloway's takedown defense and Curtis Melendez's takedown defense, where if you were able to get a full body lock position on both those guys and drag them to the ground, particularly Curtis Melendez, what you would more than likely see is that he would just roll onto his back and accept the takedown and being on bottom position. But Imadaev did not accept this position. Notice how he created a wide base with his legs, and the overhook that he was able to get in play. You see here, he's kept this overhook while defending the takedown. So even though Izotov was able to connect his hands together and control Imadaev's body, this overhook here prevents Izotov from being able to move to the back and flatten him out and complete the takedown. The overhook here on the left side is what actually saves Imadaev, and that enables him to pop back to his feet. And by keeping that overhook in play and stuffing that takedown, that has prevented Izotov from being able to control Imadaev's body and keep hold of that body lock. You can see here now that his grip is broken. And what Imadaev does a great job here is now that when the fight started, we're only 20 seconds into the fight, but so much has already happened. When Izotov first closed the distance, he was able to get double underhooks in play and connect his hands together on that full body lock very quickly, and kind of caught Imadaev cold. Imadaev didn't really have much of a chance to stop that from happening. But now that the grip of Izotov is broken, Imadaev understands the importance of preventing him from connecting his hands together again, and he's going to fight tooth and nail to prevent him from doing that. So he's still got the overhook on the left side, which he hasn't let go of. And now notice how this time Imadaev is going to fight hands, and he is going to basically prevent Izotov from being able to connect his hands around his body on a full body lock by just basically fighting hands with him, preventing Izotov from getting his hands free. So here we can see very, very nice takedown from Imadaev. This is kind of the point I was getting to. You can tell just from the techniques that Imadaev has used to defend these takedowns and keep the fight standing that it is not going to be easy to take this guy down and keep him there. Very, very good takedown defense. Notice how Izotov just cannot get his left arm free. Izotov's trying to get his left arm free so that he can connect this hand, to this hand, to control Imadaev's body, so he can try and take him down with another trip or a throw. But Imadaev's not letting him play this game on this occasion. Very, very nice. And because the takedown defense has been so solid, it's only a matter of time before Izotov has to give up on it. Notice how there, just a few seconds ago, Izotov dropped down for a single leg because he knows he can't get a full body lock in play. Also gives up on the single leg because Imadaev will not let go of this left hand, which means he can't even grab hold of a single leg. And before long, Izotov is going to be forced to abandon this position because he knows he really doesn't have anything. He's nowhere near completing a takedown here. So any second now, I would imagine they are going to disengage. I have to skip ahead a little bit just to make sure. Can't actually remember what happened in this fight, but I would guess from what is happening, they're going to disengage, and they do. Imadaev is free. So then they kind of spend, Imadaev, what you see here is Imadaev at this point has kind of turned Izotov into a bit of a panic wrestler. I didn't want to show you this because it's playing out anyway. I've just got to cover it. Now Izotov shot him very far out from outside of Imadaev's range. We've seen the takedown coming. He's able to sprawl out of it, and he forces Izotov to roll to his back. So then we see Imadaev with a nice little period of top control. You know, reasonably nice top control, though he does give his opponent a lot of space to scramble back to their feet, and that's where you see here Imadaev allowing Izotov to get back up. But I just want to show you the ending of this fight. Nothing really specific to talk about, but a very, very nice ending to the fight that you should see, because it's going to end any second now. You can see Izotov looking quite tired, taking some deep breaths there before Imadaev works in, throws a very high risk, low reward attack here. I'm not going to spoil it for you, but it's coming any second. There it is, very nice spinning elbow knockout, and finishes up with a ground and pound. So again, even though that fight only lasted 2 minutes, we got to learn a hell of a lot about Imadaev. We know that his takedown defense is pretty solid, which may not matter too much in this fight because Max Griffin is primarily a striker, but we have seen Griffin start to incorporate wrestling more and more into his overall skill set. You know, we saw him trying to steal rounds in his last fight against Thiago Alves, but based on Imadaev's takedown defense in that fight, even though the guy he was fighting, Izotov, was obviously quite low level, he still showed the correct technique. And remember, you don't always need to see fighters compete against a high level of opponent to be able to determine their level of skills. we look at Randy Costa, we can tell from the kicks that he was throwing against super low level guys that his kicks are very technical and very high level, very sharp, very, very nice kicking technique. And we can also tell from the techniques Imadaev was using that he's got very, very good takedown defense. So now we want to move on to the final fight that I want to show you. This is Imadaev against Dmitry Tuzov. So this was Tuzov's pro MMA debut. So obviously not really going to be that high level of a guy. This fight lasted longer than most of Imadaev's fights, but to be honest with you, this fight doesn't really tell us that much at all. As the fight starts here, we can see it's a very aggressive start from Imadaev here. He's in the black shorts, coming out very aggressively, going after his extremely inexperienced opponent, although Tuzov does not move like a fighter that is making their pro debut. Looks to be pretty skilled here, so I'm guessing he has competed in Sambo or something like that for quite a long period of time, judging by the way he moves. But here, you can see that Imadaev gives up a really weak takedown because he gets over aggressive. But remember, here he gives up a really weak takedown. So I know that I've just said Imadaev's got excellent takedown defense, but remember, this fight took place back in 2016 when Imadaev probably only would have been 21 or 22 years old. So he's obviously, judging by the takedown defense that he showed in his most recent fight against Ivan Gluhak this time last year, his takedown defense has obviously improved quite a lot since then. So if we get back into this fight here, so you can see a very aggressive start, but Imadaev does a good job of popping back up to his feet quickly, which you will see here. Just gonna have a quick drink, guys. So even though he gave up that really weak takedown, did a good job of popping back up to his feet quickly. And then the next thing that I want to show you is, again, we saw at the beginning of the fight how he got overly aggressive and fell into a really weak takedown, and you're going to see him do exactly the same thing here, getting very aggressive with Tuzov, and here throws a flying knee and again jumps into a really weak takedown that could have been avoided had he not been coming forward with such recklessness. Now, what you can see from this little sequence here, it doesn't last very long, but in this sequence, Imadaev actually looks quite weak off his back. So Tuzov actually gets a little bit of top control here, easily passes Imadaev's guard, moving into side control. Don't want to spend too long on this, guys. The fight is available on YouTube. But you can tell Imadaev is quite weak off his back. If we just play this sequence out, you know, Tuzov's passing his guard, moving to side control, threatening to advance the mount quite easily. But then Tuzov, being very inexperienced, actually makes the mistake of giving what he actually does here. Tuzov makes the mistake here and allows Imadaev up, because Imadaev here is very weak off his back. His shoulders are flattened out on the canvas. We see Tuzov easily controlling him from top position. He can just chill in side control here if he wants to. But what Tuzov actually does here, he gets impatient. And notice any second now, he's going to bait Imadaev to stand him back up. So notice that. Notice how just a few moments ago, Tuzov was very heavy on Imadaev, pressing down with all his body weight from side control. But notice here how Tuzov just sat up a little bit and giving Imadaev the space to try and scramble back to his feet. Well, Tuzov has intentionally done that to bait Imadaev into standing back up so he can actually work for a guillotine. But it's a big mistake, because by doing that, Tuzov doesn't manage to get the submission and ends up on the bottom. I hate it when fighters do that. I hate it when they pull guard on a guillotine, because they put themselves in a bad position. You know, Imadaev was controlling Tuzov was controlling Imadaev easily from top position, and all he had to do was ride out the round for 2.5 minutes and he would have won the round. But instead, he pulled guard on a guillotine, has now ended up on the bottom. Imadaev slips out of it, and Tuzov winds up losing the round. So that is pretty much all I want to show you about this fight, guys. The only other thing to mention is that when Imadaev does eventually slip out of that guillotine, you can see that he's very aggressive from top position, but he doesn't have the best top control. If you go and watch this fight on YouTube, you can just see that he gives his opponent a lot of space to stand back up. You know, you can see here Imadaev just kneeled up, hammering down ground and pound. But with Chuzov being so close to the cage, if he knew what to do, if he was a little bit more experienced, he could get his back tight to the cage and pop back up very quickly. So I noticed in this fight, Imadaev did give Chuzov a lot of space, and here again, giving him space to stand back up. Doesn't really have the heaviest top game, gives his opponent a lot of space, but we don't need to talk any more of that. So what I've just shown you is pretty much all we know about Imadaev, to be honest, which isn't much. We don't know too much about his striking because most of his fights end up either ending very quickly or end up being, you know, predominantly grappling exchanges, and that is significant because Max Griffin is primarily a striker, and Max Griffin also has been making significant improvements from fight to fight. In his last fight against Thiago Alves, he looked like a completely different fighter to how he looked against Curtis Melender, Mike Perry and Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos. I was really impressed with Griffin in his last fight against Thiago Alves. He looked great. He done a really good job of fighting long. Basically did a really good job of pumping the jab. And Griffin, throughout his UFC career, has demonstrated pretty bad striking defense. But against Thiago Alves, his striking defense, particularly in the first round, looked very good. He was very sharp. Griffin looked great against Thiago Alves. But it's tough to gauge how he's going to do if this fight stays standing, because Imadaev's striking is pretty much an unknown. Also, the one concern I have about this matchup is that Max Griffin does have quite poor takedown defense, and even though Imadaev did show some weaknesses in the footage I just showed you when it came to grappling, out of all the grappling exchanges that we saw, we really didn't get an opportunity to see Imadaev's offensive wrestling. I mean, we know his top game wasn't the heaviest, but we don't know anything about his offensive wrestling. All the grappling exchanges that I saw him in his past fights was him reacting to what his opponent was doing, defending positions or taking advantage of positions that his opponent had gifted to him. For example, Chuzov ended up on the bottom by pulling guard on a guillotine. So I don't know how much of a wrestling threat Imadaev poses to Griffin. You know, does he have any offensive wrestling? Will he even try to take Griffin down? But that's what makes this fight very tricky for betting, is because we don't really know a great deal about Imadaev. So if we look at this fight from a betting perspective, let's take a look at the odds. So Max Griffin, I'm actually going to close that down because it's going to lag my computer out. So if we look at the odds, so Max Griffin is around about a 2.0. Wow, the odds have changed since I actually started preparing to talk to you about this fight. Okay, so they haven't changed so much, but basically by changed, I mean when I started preparing to talk to you about this fight, Griffin was around about 1.90 everywhere, whereas now I can see he's 2.0 on William Hill, which is plus 100. And at those odds, Griffin is getting very interesting to me. Not so much 1.91, but definitely interesting as an underdog. But let's take a look at the odds. So on average at the moment, Griffin's odds are roughly around about 1.95. Giving him an implied probability of 51%. And if we take a look at the odds on Imadaev, and sorry guys, minus 195, 1.95 for the Americans is minus 105. And then for, we have got Imadaev around about, some sites down as low as 1.80, but we will just call it an average of 1.91 at the moment, which is minus 110. For an implied probability of 52%. So obviously the way the bookies are capping this fight at the moment, they both give both guys roughly a 50-50 chance of winning. Now, from a betting perspective, you do have to favour Griffin here because we know exactly what we're getting from him. I mean, for a start, we know that a massive percentage of fighters that make their UFC debut actually lose. And we also know that Griffin has made significant improvements from fight to fight. His striking against Thiago Alves looked excellent. He did a really good job using footwork to stay on the outside, stayed light on his feet, stayed behind his jab, and protected himself much better than he had done in the past. Unfortunately, his Achilles heel in the past has been his takedown defense, and because he's fought, you know, strikers over his last few matchups, it's tough to gauge where his takedown defense is at the moment. But Imadaev, is the favourite, and I do think that's a little bit silly, to be honest with you, because like I say, he hasn't showed me anything in those fights that make me think he's something special, if I'm honest with you. I mean, he gave up some weak takedowns, albeit they were a long time ago. When he was on his back, he looked very average, and his striking, I mean, he got an impressive knockout with that spinning elbow, but it's unlikely you're going to catch a guy like Griffin with a technique like that. A guy like Griffin that stays light on his feet, fights very long. So it's really tough to gauge where Imadaev is. So obviously Imadaev's going to be a bad bet. You would never want to bet on a guy like Imadaev under these circumstances. But Griffin's also a risk because we don't really know what Imadaev's striking is like. We haven't really seen it. And Griffin does have bad takedown defenses, undeniable. But if Griffin's odds continue to improve, because he was the favourite, I think Griffin was around 1.91 or 1.70 actually. Griffin was around about 1.70, which is for the Americans. So 1.70 would be minus 143. And his odds on William Hill have now improved to 2.0, which is plus 100. So Griffin's odds are improving a lot, and we are still 7 days away from UFC 236. So if Griffin's odds continue to improve, I do think he would be a good bet, guys. You know, if I could get Griffin at 2.10, which would be plus 110, or if I could get Griffin at 2.20, which would be plus 120, that would be a gamble I would be willing to take, because, you know, even if Imadaev did come out looking like an amazing striker, or he did come out and take Griffin down and absolutely dominate him in a grappling based fight, at least we're getting a good amount of value for that risk. But the likelihood is, you know, Imadaev making his UFC debut is probably going to struggle. We know Griffin's improving from fight to fight. We know his striking is excellent. So Griffin's definitely interesting at these odds. He is definitely interesting. I'm not seeing Imadaev show anything that scares me. Doesn't look that great, to be honest with you. But at the same time, there are quite a lot of unknowns with him. So betting against him is going to be a gamble, just because he could show up with a set of skills we haven't seen from him before, which could cause Griffin some problems. So now we move on to the next fight, guys, which is going to be Alan Jouban against Dwight Grant. Now, this is a very interesting fight because there is absolutely no doubt about it that Alan Jouban is better than Dwight Grant in every single aspect of MMA. He is a very technical kickboxer. He's a significantly better striker than Grant, and he's also a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And Eddie Bravo at 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu. We really think of Alan Jouban as predominantly a kickboxer, predominantly a striker, but his ground game's actually very legit. He's not the strongest wrestler, doesn't have the best takedown defense, but on the ground he's very dangerous with that 10th Planet BJJ background. And when you come to Dwight Grant, it's quite the opposite, to be honest with you. Dwight Grant is one of those guys who's not particularly great at anything. He's just reasonably good at everything. He's got reasonably good takedown defense, reasonably hard to hold down. His striking, he's kind of like a herky-jerky, awkward kind of striker. Does fight very long, but also very awkward, very unorthodox. Likes to stay on the outside, play the role of matador a little bit. Doesn't really like to engage. You can tell from the way that Dwight Grant fights that he doesn't like to engage, because you'll often see him do, you know, something similar to what Neil Magny does. They kind of duck their head away and kind of nervously move out of the way of their opponent's shots when they're trying to evade strikes, which is usually a sign they don't like to get hit and they are not comfortable in exchanging. So that's obviously a bit of a concern against Alan Jouban, who is a wild, aggressive madman that has got no problem getting right in the boxing range and exchanging with you. But you're probably at this point thinking that if Alan Jouban is significantly better than Dwight Grant everywhere, obviously Alan Jouban is going to be a good bet. Well, I wish that were the case, guys, because Alan Jouban is one of my favourite fighters. I think he's absolutely brilliant. I love Alan Jouban, but unfortunately, I do have some really big concerns over Jouban. So he's now 37 years old, and we know Father Time catches up with everyone eventually. You know, Alan Jouban has been in a lot of wars. If we look at his record, he's got 22 fights, and the majority of these 22 fights, or at least half of these 22 fights, are absolute wars. You know, Jouban's never really been one of the guys that goes out there and starches his opponents. Jouban has been one of those guys that wins a war of attrition. He's tougher, he's more technical. He breaks guys down with pressure and volume, out-hearting them. And in his prime, Jouban was absolutely incredible. That's why he's one of my favourite fighters ever. He's just a warrior. He's so exciting to watch. He's got so much heart. I love Alan Jouban. But the problem is the cost of those wars will start to catch up with you at the age of 37. And over the last 2 or 3 years, there have been signs that those wars are starting to catch up with him. Because in his last few fights, Alan Jouban has looked quite fragile, has looked a little bit chinny. You know, if we look back over the last few years, the majority of his fights in the UFC have been absolute wars. And he's been rocked, dropped, or knocked out in pretty much every single one of his fights. You know, against Ben Saunders, even though he wasn't rocked or dropped or knocked out, he still ate some big shots in that Saunders fight and looked very fragile. He was obviously death-shotted by Nico Price, dropped and rocked and wobbled very bad by Gunnar Nelson. I know it says that Nelson won from a guillotine choke here, but he actually hurt Jouban very badly, wobbled him, and then as Jouban went to the ground, Nelson jumped on him and got a guillotine. He won the Mike Perry fight, but he was rocked on at least 2 occasions in that fight. He was also rocked by Belal Muhammad, took a lot of damage in that fight because he adrenaline dumped going for the finish early. Brendan O'Reilly was really one of the few fights where Jouban hadn't really taken that much damage at all. This was a nice, clean, easy win for Jouban. And then the fight also against Albert Tumenov was a vicious KO, loss. So over the last sort of 4 years, Jouban has suffered an immense amount of damage, suffered an amazing amount of head trauma. He really has taken a lot of damage. And I always like to look at fighters and athletes like a battery. You know, when they first start their career, the battery is full. But with every single war that they go through, more of that charge in that battery gets basically taken away until one day that battery's flat and it's just useless. Can't basically perform how it used to. You know, when a battery's flat, you can't use it anymore. And that is pretty much how I like to look at fighters. They're like a resource that will eventually run out. And at this stage in Jouban's career, after so many wars, at 37 years old, he just can't take a punch anymore. He has looked very chinny, has looked very fragile. And it's no surprise after all the amazing fights that he's given us. He's an absolute legend of the sport and an absolute warrior. I love him to bits. I think he's brilliant. But Dwight Grant is obviously at a significant disadvantage when it comes to technique. But Dwight Grant's one of those really strange fighters. If I would just pick out a 1 or 2 minute clip of Dwight Grant fighting in kickboxing range, striking with his opponent, and I were to play it to you, it really wouldn't look anything special. I mean, he doesn't really commit to his shots that much, doesn't really put any combos together, really not that technical at all, quite a herky-jerky, awkward style, not really dangerous at all, to be honest with you. But Grant's one of these really strange, awkward fighters that at certain times in a fight, he will just hulk out and commit everything to one particular shot. And if that shot lands, which it often does, because when he actually changes levels, he's pretty fast, his power is devastating. And we've seen that in every single one of his fights in the UFC. You know, he won his last fight against Carlo Pedersoli with a devastating knockout. He dropped Zach Otto in round 1 of this fight, and his knockout win of Tyler Hill on Dana White's Contender Series was also equally brutal. But it's so strange because in all other moments of the fight before he lands that KO shot, he just doesn't look dangerous at all. He really doesn't. And I think Dwight Grant, because he doesn't really carry that much power on his shots, and because he doesn't like engaging, he's always kind of like hesitating and refusing to sit down on his shots and engage with his opponent. I think it's almost because he doesn't like to engage, he almost lures his opponents into a false sense of security. And then when he does actually change levels, sit down on his shots and fully commit to something, when he lands, it's absolutely devastating. And because he doesn't do it that often, it catches his opponent out because he moves so fast and lands with such impact. And it is so devastating when he lands. You know, they always say that the punches that knock you out are the ones that you don't see coming. And that definitely applies to Dwight Grant because he's so unpredictable. He just doesn't look dangerous. And then 1 minute, bang, commits everything he's got to a fast knockout shot and you're dead because you don't see it coming, you don't expect it. He lures you into almost his... I don't want to be disrespectful, I don't want to use a disrespectful word, but he lures you into thinking that he's not that dangerous and then lands the kill shot. And that's what makes it a dangerous fight to bet on, because on one hand we've got Jouban, who's technically better everywhere, but he's older, he's more fragile, he's not as durable, against Dwight Grant, who isn't that much younger than Alan Jouban, but a hell of a lot younger in terms of fight miles. He's got the power to really hurt Jouban and put him away. So it is a tricky fight for betting for that reason. I haven't really mentioned the grappling aspect of this, because both guys are primarily strikers. They'll want to keep this standing. I mean, Dwight Grant, trained at American Kickboxing Academy, is probably the stronger wrestler, but on the ground, Alan Jouban's an absolute nightmare with his brown belt in 10th Planet BJJ under Eddie Bravo, so he can more than deal with Grant's wrestling if it does go to the ground. So I think I've said pretty much everything I want to say on this fight, so it's just really a case of talking about the odds, I think. So if we look at the odds, we have got, so it looks to me like Jouban's odds have actually declined a little bit, so they have a little, not much. So last week they were, or at the beginning of this week, sorry, on Monday, he was around about a 1.88 favourite. He's now down to around about 1.83 as an average, I guess. So if you put those odds into our calculator, so odds of 1.83 on Jouban's minus 120, giving him an implied probability of 55%. You can probably already guess what I'm going to say, guys. Even though Jouban's significantly better than Dwight Grant everywhere, he gets rocked or dropped or knocked out in every fight, and Dwight Grant's the kind of guy that hits you so hard and his follow-up shots are so devastating. If he just lands clean and hard on Jouban one time in a 15-minute window, he's going to get the finish. So there's no way that I would bet on Jouban here, guys. Although one thing I will say is that Jouban is a very technical fighter, a very intelligent fighter. He always comes into matchups with a game plan, and Jouban, being such a smart guy, must know at this stage in his career, after the way his last few fights have gone, that he can't take a punch like he used to. So he could come in with an intelligent game plan just to stay disciplined, stay out of trouble, and try and pick Dwight Grant apart and win a technical kickboxing match, in which case I do think that's a very clear path victory for Jouban, and I feel that he can definitely do that. That is how he basically beat Mike Perry, just outclassed him, stayed on the outside, played the role of Matador, and chipped away at Perry. Now, he won't be able to use that strategy against Dwight Grant, because Grant likes to fight on the outside, but he can definitely fight him in kickboxing range, outstrike him, and as long as Jouban doesn't overcommit too much of his shots and put himself in danger, I don't see Grant being able to get into a position where he can land a kill shot, because Grant's not really the kind of guy to lead. He's more reactive, so when he does land a kill shot, it tends to be because their opponent has made a mistake, done something overly aggressive, or put themselves in a position for Grant to land a hard counter. But Jouban could fight very smart, could outclass him, could use his technique to win a nice, clean, comfortable decision. But if he makes one mistake, it could be all over. So if we look at the odds on Dwight Grant, so Grant's odds are improving at the moment by the look of it. At the beginning of this week on Monday, he was around about a 1.92. I guess there's no underdog or favourite in odds, with both guys being around about the same. But now he is the underdog, because on some sites you can get him as high as 2.05, which is plus 105 for an implied probability of 49%. So the bookies are roughly, again, just like the last fight between Griffin and Imadaev, seeing this is a 50-50 fight. And I can see where they're coming from, because again, you've got Alan Jouban with the technique, and then you've got Dwight Grant with the durability and the power, you know, with Jouban having real big issues with his durability and ability to take a punch now. But to be honest with you, Grant is, I mean, I never like to bet on fighters that are second best everywhere from a technical point of view, but Grant is getting interesting to me. Now, I wouldn't want to bet him at these odds, because I don't think there's a big enough margin on him. But if his odds continue to improve, similar how I just said, if Griffin's odds improve, you know, again, we are 7 days away from UFC 236. Dwight Grant's odds are clearly improving, which you can see here. You know, they are up from 1.92 up to 2.05 on some betting sites. You know, if we saw if we saw Dwight Grant's odds improved up to 2.20, that would definitely get interesting to me, because the way I see it, I don't feel great about a bet on Dwight Grant, but I feel it's way more likely that he finds a way to land a kill shot inside a 15-minute period than it is for Alan Jouban to stay out of control, stay out of danger, and cruise to a decision win. I just feel that at some point in the fight, Dwight Grant is going to get an opening to land a really big hard power shot on Jouban, and when he does, he's very good at following up and getting the finish. I don't think if Jouban gets hurt, he's going to get an opportunity to recover. And with Alan Jouban being rocked, dropped, wobbled, or knocked out in pretty much every single one of his UFC fights so far, apart from the Richie Walsh and Brandon O'Reilly fights, I just think that Dwight Grant, it's more likely Dwight Grant gets it done. But with him being second best from a technical point of view everywhere, I need to get a bigger return for my money. So betting him at these odds, 2.05, which is plus 105, you know, I do think that I do cap Grant at having a 50%, 60% chance of winning. Not sure exactly what figure I give him. I know it's probably a little bit more than 50%. I know it's probably not as much as 60%. So I need to see these odds improve before I can bet Grant. But with 7 days before the event, we've already seen a lot of line movement on this card. There is a very good chance the odds go in our favour and we get an opportunity to bet Grant. So I'm just going to see what happens with this one, guys. Keep an eye on the way the odds move over the next 7 days or whenever you're watching this video. By the time you watch this video, Grant's odds may have already reached the point where I think he could be worth a bet. So let's move on to the next fight that I want to talk about, guys, which is a main card fight. And one other thing I want to point out, even though the main event and the co-main event are absolutely amazing, I think this is the best main event, co-main event combination that we've had in a long time. The rest of this card is absolutely rubbish. It is just crap. It really is. As I've delved deeper and deeper into research, I'm just not really liking this card too much at all in terms of the fights on there. I think that there's a lot of fighters on this card which, I don't know, I guess you have to remember this is a pay-per-view card, and they're going to be asking people in the United States to pay like $79.99 for this, you know, $80. These type of cards don't bother me so much, because obviously in a country like the UK, we just pay our TV subscription. We can watch these fights on TV, but to pay $80 for this card is, it's a lot of money, because like I say, outside of these two fights, it isn't great. But anyway, enough of that. Let's get into the next fight. Eryk Anders against Khalil Rountree. So this fight is a tricky one for betting, because both guys have significant weaknesses that their opponent can exploit and take advantage of. So Khalil Rountree's weakness is obviously his takedown defense. It's been his Achilles heel throughout his career. And Khalil Rountree is one of these really frustrating guys that actually has very, very good initial takedown defense. He's actually got excellent takedown defense. You know, in the clip I showed you of Imadaev earlier on defending the takedown against the cage, I couldn't even remember what happened in that clip, but I knew that he was going to be able to stuff that takedown because of the techniques that he was using. He was preventing his opponent from getting into a position to complete the takedown. And Khalil Rountree does exactly the same thing. The initial stuff of the takedown is excellent. He knows the techniques that he should be using. He uses the correct techniques to stuff the initial takedown attempt. And when you see him, you're like, finally, look, yeah, he's doing a great job at defending this takedown. And then for whatever reason, it might be a lapse in concentration. I don't really know what it is, but for whatever reason, as soon as his opponent drives through or changes the takedown attempt into something else, his technique completely goes out the window and he winds up giving away really, really cheap, easy takedowns that he should be stuffing, because he shows the correct technique to stuff the initial takedown. So I don't know why he just kind of completely goes to pieces when his opponent switches things up. It's very frustrating to watch. So Rountree's takedown defense is a big issue. But Eryk Anders also has his own issues. So he has bad fight IQ, extremely bad fight IQ. You know, some of his performances in the UFC have been infuriating. Against Elias Theodorou, he basically threw that fight away. He just followed Theodorou around the cage, eating leg kicks, despite the fact that in the third round, Theodorou was gassed out of his mind. The second round was actually dominant round for Anders, and going into the third round, both guys were up 1 round apiece. Theodorou won the first, Anders won the second, so whoever won that third round would have won the fight. And instead of Anders really going for it and turning up the pace, he just allowed Theodorou to chip away at him with leg kicks from the outside and basically threw the fight away. So really bad fight IQ from Anders in that matchup, which was a huge red flag. Don't really want to say anything nasty about Anders for his performance against Santos. I think he took that fight on short notice, showed so much heart in that. He was an absolute warrior. But even though he won this fight against Tim Williams, it was another kind of dumb performance, I guess, because up until the third round, Anders was just reluctant to let his hands go. Really didn't put his stamp on the rounds that much, and just looked quite hesitant and tentative again, similar to how he looked in the first and third round against Theodorou. And Anders also has questionable striking defense. He's definitely there to be hit. For whatever reason, his opponents are able to land on him quite frequently, and as we know, that could be bad news against a guy like Khalil Rountree. Very high level striker, very technical, carries legit KO power in every shot. Khalil Rountree is an extremely dangerous striker, and Anders, even though he showed off a relatively good chin throughout his career, you do not want to be in power shots from Rountree, because Rountree's got the power to kill you dead with anything that lands. So if this fight stays standing, I definitely give Khalil Rountree a huge advantage. He's just very, very technical, very powerful, and you can also see that when his opponents face him, they're kind of a little bit intimidated by him. He's very confident, the way he moves is very fluid, his technique is very fluid, and really his opponents are reluctant to let their hands go for fear of what he may do. He really does manage to gain respect from his opponents when it comes to standing, and seeing how tentative and passive Anders has been against Theodorou, Lyoto Machida, and also Tim Williams in the stand-up exchanges, I really think that unless Anders can get this fight to the ground, you're going to see Rountree put on a bit of a striking clinic. I really do think if this fight stays standing, Rountree will dominate. But obviously, we know Rountree has very questionable takedown defense, and that is an issue because Anders is a relatively strong, athletic guy. I'm not going to say Anders is a strong wrestler. He doesn't have the best offensive wrestling, but Anders is one of those guys that's persistent. He doesn't really use the correct offensive wrestling technique, but he will fully commit to his takedowns and drive through to complete a takedown and chain takedown attempts together, which is obviously a big issue against someone like Rountree, because Rountree, like I say, does a really good job of stuffing the initial takedown. And many guys, you know, there are a lot of grapplers out there, you know, in particular BJJ-based grapplers, who, if they shoot in and they don't get a takedown, they will retreat after their initial shot has been stuffed. Anders isn't like that. If his initial shot gets stuffed, he'll chain into something else. He'll keep working for it. And that's significant because, like I've just said, Rountree's great at stuffing the initial takedown attempt, but then he kind of just goes to pieces when his opponent really commits to something else or chains into another technique. So I do think Anders can get this fight to the ground. My only concern with Anders is that he's just a low-volume guy. When I said that he had bad fight IQ a few moments ago, I meant it. And by that, I mean there's just no urgency. Just doesn't really... There have been points in the Lyoto Machida and the Elias Theodorou fight where it has been entirely clear watching it that if he would just make slight adjustments, he would be able to put his stamp on rounds and win a fight. But he just doesn't. It just doesn't make an adjustment. He's got no plan B. He comes in and he fights with one system and at one pace, and he just doesn't switch things up, doesn't do things differently. And that's a problem, because if his strategy or game plan isn't working, he won't change it, which means he's a frustrating guy to bet, is what I'm trying to say. Yes, Anders has the wrestling to take Khalil Rountree down and control him on the ground, but Anders doesn't really shoot that many takedowns. You know, maybe one per round, one every 2 rounds, and he doesn't really throw or land that higher volume of strikes per round. So he's just a frustrating guy. So from a betting point of view, if we take a look at where are we going to take a look at? If we take a look at the odds, we can see that at the moment Anders is a relatively big favourite, odds of around about 1.53, which is minus 189, giving him an implied probability of 65%. There's no way that I would bet Anders in this fight, just because even though he has the wrestling to dictate where this fight takes place, theoretically he should be able to take Rountree down and control him on the ground. He's just not smart enough to realise that. You know, if I was his coach, my game plan for Anders would be spend the first 2 or 3 minutes of the round focusing on keeping the fight in kickboxing range and just defending yourself. At the end of the day, you know, if Anders just avoids engaging with Rountree, shouldn't get caught by any big shots, shouldn't get caught by anything crazy. So just avoid allowing Rountree to land anything big for the first 2-3 minutes of the round. Then in the final minute or two of the round, Anders should be committing everything he's got to a takedown, to drag Khalil Rountree to the ground and end every round in a dominant position. It's a very easy game plan. I think if Anders came in and stuck to that game plan, he would win easily. 30-27, no problem. But I don't trust him to do that. I think he could think he's a kickboxer and try and win the fight kickboxing in the first round, might shoot a takedown in the second. He's not reliable, so there's no way I can bet him at these odds, is what I'm trying to say. But Khalil Rountree currently is around about an average of 2.65 underdog, which is plus 165, giving him an implied probability of 38%. And to be honest with you guys, with this fight, I think the odds are exactly where they should be. I mean, this is what we have to expect, to be honest with you. At the end of the day, these betting websites, these gambling companies are multinational companies. Some of them earn billions and billions of dollars a year in profit. It's their job to set accurate odds on things. So there's no point in trying to hunt for value where there isn't any. And this fight is a very good example of a fight where the odds are exactly where they should be. Anders deserves to be the favourite because he has got the wrestling to take Khalil Rountree down and win an easy decision if he chooses to. And Khalil Rountree is the underdog because he basically has to rely on Anders fighting them in order to win. That's really why it is. But as we know, Anders is very likely to fight them. So this isn't the type of fight that I like to bet on, because if I am going to roll the dice and take a gamble on an underdog, I like to bet on the underdog based on the fact that they can win the fight on all the things they do great. I want to bet on an underdog that can win a fight by being the better fighter. In a situation like this, if Rountree wins, it's going to be because Anders does something stupid and beats himself. I don't like those kind of bets, and that is why I'm passing here. So that is it for that fight, guys. I would recommend passing on this one as well. And then we go into the final fight that I want to talk about in this video, which is Poliana Botelho against Lauren Mueller. Now, this is a tricky fight for betting, and I guess I've said that a lot in this video, and I've said that quite a few times in parts 1 and 2 of these videos as well. And I guess the reason why I'm saying that about so many of these fights is speaking a little bit to what I mentioned a few moments ago, where I said the card's not the best. Like, this is a massive pay-per-view card. The main event, the co-main event are brilliant, but the rest of the card, is made up by a lot of inexperienced fighters, where we have a lot of unanswered questions about them. And for that reason, it gets really difficult betting a lot of these fights and accurately capping a lot of these fights, because there's so much that we don't know about so many of these fighters, and we've spoken a little bit about that in the Zalim Imadaev versus Max Griffin breakdown. And I'm going to say it again with Lauren Mueller against Poliana Botelho. Now, even though both girls have got a couple fights in the UFC, there are still massive gaps in their skill set. There are still massive gaps in knowledge, that just things that we don't know from watching their past fights, just gaps in knowledge that we need to be able to accurately cap this fight that we don't have. So both these girls are primarily strikers, but they have very, very different styles. Lauren Mueller is primarily a boxer. She's got a very traditional boxing style, and she is one of the better technical boxers in the flyweight division. I do like her boxing a lot. And Poliana Botelho is much more of a kickboxing Muay Thai style. With Poliana Botelho, the her striking skill set is all based around her kicks. So you'll see Mueller will throw some kicks, but doesn't really go to her kicks that much. Whereas Poliana Botelho, everything she does with her striking is set up from her kicks. She only really throws punches when her opponents get in the boxing range and force her to fight in a range where she can't get her kicks off. So what I want to talk a little bit about in this fight is repeating quite a lot of what I said in the Justin Gaethje versus Edson Barboza breakdown, where when you have a fighter or when you have a striker whose entire striking technique skill set centers around throwing kicks, a boxer is quite a bad matchup for that style, because if you pressure a kicker, you basically take away their kicks, because if you walk a kicker down, they don't have the time and space to get their kicking techniques off. And we saw that against Edson Barboza. Edson Barboza couldn't get his devastating kicks off against Justin Gaethje, because Justin Gaethje's boxing enabled him to walk him down, get in the boxing range, and force Barboza to fight in a range where he couldn't let his kicks go. And we could see that in this fight from Laura Mueller. Mueller's got very nice boxing, and if she comes in with a smart, intelligent game plan, walks Botelho down, I think it will take away Botelho's kicking game, which will give Mueller a huge advantage. The problem is Mueller is only 27 years old. She's only had 6 pro fights. She is quite inexperienced, and with her boxing style, she just does like to fight in kickboxing range in the middle of the octagon. She's not really a pressure fighter. She's not the type of fighter who would go and walk Botelho down, put pressure on it and take her kicks away. But that doesn't mean she won't do it this weekend. Just because we haven't seen her do it in the past, don't mean that that's not what she's going to do in the future. Because even though her Tapology page says that she trains at San Diego Fight Club, that's actually inaccurate. Laura Mueller actually trains at Alliance MMA, and that's obviously a very good gym. They could have her coming in with a very solid game plan. It would not be difficult to do tape study on Poliana Botelho and work out a game plan that could beat her. At the end of the day, I'm just some stupid British dude that sits in front of a computer all week watching fights and processing this information, working it out. You know, I am nowhere near as knowledgeable when it comes to fighting technique as some of these high-level coaches. And I'm sure if I can identify a game plan to beat someone like Botelho, I'm sure that Mueller's coaches at Alliance MMA can do the same. But it's whether she'll have the confidence to do it, you know, because it's not easy to walk your opponent down, put yourself in the firing line and apply a lot of pressure. That's one of the things that makes guys like Justin Gaethje and Tony Ferguson so great. But if Mueller does walk Botelho down, she will take away one of her biggest weapons, which are the kicks. But also, I do have to say that I've kind of said that Botelho, her entire striking is based around her kicks, which from what I've seen it is. But at the same time, that doesn't necessarily mean she doesn't have decent hands as well. Because unfortunately, in her last, in her fights in the UFC, she hasn't really shown her boxing at all. These 2 fights ended very quickly, and her fight against Pearl Gonzalez was contested pretty much entirely in a clinch. And when the fight was in kickboxing range, you can guess what I'm about to say, Botelho was just landing kicks. And these fights took place way too long ago to be able to really gain any good amount of knowledge on where Botelho's skill set's currently at. What I would say is back in these fights from 2014 and 2015, Botelho's hands did look quite sloppy. But she trains at Nova União with some of the best coaches in the world. So I've no doubt that her boxing has improved a hell of a lot in the last 4 or 5 years since these fights took place. So it's tough to gauge where Botelho's boxing is. I'm saying Mueller's the better boxer, but she might not be. And that speaks more to the gaps in information that I've brought up multiple times on this card. Botelho's striking does seem to be all kicks based on the fights that I've seen from her, but who knows, she may have some boxing in the locker that we haven't seen. So from a grappling point of view, both these girls are primarily strikers, so I don't expect to see this fight to go to the ground. If it does, this is just a big assumption. We haven't seen a great deal of either girl's ground game, but if it does go to the ground, I would give Botelho the advantage simply because Mueller gave up and tapped to a really weak submission against Yanan Wu in her last fight. She basically instantly tapped as soon as Wu got anywhere near the armbar, which suggests to me that Mueller's a very low-level grappler, very inexperienced and not confident in her ability to fight on the ground or defend submissions. So for that reason, I would give Botelho an advantage because she's a bit older. She's been training at Nova União for a long time with, again, some very, very high-level black belts in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So it's just a hunch. I haven't seen anything. I haven't got evidence to back it up. But my hunch is that Botelho would have quite a big advantage if it goes to the ground. So when it comes to breaking this fight down and summarising everything I've just said, the only real thing that I want to mention is that I do think, based on the skills that both girls have showed me in their past fights, I do think that this will be a close fight. I really do. I think this fight could go either way, and I think, you know, there's a very good chance that this could be one of these really close back and forth female fights that ends up with someone winning a split decision. Having said that, one thing that I do think could be the deciding factor in this matchup is Botelho's physicality. Now, we see this, for whatever reason, we see physicality determine the outcome of women's MMA fights way more than men's MMA. Now, I spoke at length in the Adesanya versus Kelvin Gastelum breakdown about how size makes a big difference in MMA. We have weight classes for a reason, and how Adesanya's massive size and reach advantage gives him a huge advantage over Kelvin Gastelum. But that is true at all levels of MMA. But when you see different body types in men's MMA, if they're roughly the same height and roughly the same reach, the different body types, they don't really make that much of a difference in the outcome of men's MMA fights. However, and I don't know what the reason is, but in women's MMA fights, physicality plays a much bigger part in the outcome of matchups. And that's one reason why I think Botelho might actually edge it here. Because at 5'8", with a 67-inch reach, she's not that much bigger than Laura Mueller, who's 5'5" with a 67-inch reach. You know, they've got the same reach. Botelho is only 3 inches taller, which is nothing really. But if you look at both girls in the octagon, they've just got completely different body types. You know, Mueller is quite lean and quite slight and quite feminine, whereas Botelho is big and powerful and muscular and strong. If you go back and watch Botelho's fights, I'm not being disrespectful when I say this at all. She's a beautiful girl. She's an incredible athlete. But if you look at her legs, they are literally like an NFL athlete's legs. They are thick. They are powerful. And I think that is one of the big reasons why Botelho's kicks are so devastating. Her leg muscle, she can generate so much snap and power and torque from her kicks. And if you look at both girls, she's just way more physically imposing, way physically stronger. And in men's MMA, that doesn't seem to be that big of a deal. There's strengths and weaknesses with all body types. But in women's MMA, you know, we had an excellent example on the last card between Jessica Aguilar and Marina Rodriguez, where Aguilar, in terms of technique, you saw in the first round, in terms of technique, she was able to hold her own technically against Marina Rodriguez, but because Marina Rodriguez was so much more physically imposing, she could walk through Aguilar's shots, she could power her way out of the grappling exchanges, and Aguilar just couldn't deal with her physicality. And I think there is a legit chance we might see that in this fight, because Botelho is just physically imposing. She's a strong, powerful woman, whereas Mueller is quite slight and quite feminine. And it's a big deal in women's MMA, guys. It is a really big deal. Now, I'm doing this video. I can't think of too many examples off the top of my head, but I'm sure if you go back and watch my videos, I've talked about this a bunch of times. It is a big deal. Actually, a really other good example I can think of was Molly McCann against Priscilla Cachoeira. I talked about how physicality may have played a part in that fight. And even though Molly McCann did win that fight, I spoke about how Cachoeira's physicality and size may have had an impact on that matchup, may have been a part of victory for her. And if you go back and watch that third round of that fight, it got to the stage where Molly McCann, being so much smaller, just couldn't gain respect and couldn't back Cachoeira up anymore. And Cachoeira was just walking her down, eating everything that McCann threw at her. And I think one of the deciding factors in this matchup could be, because I do think it could be quite close, do think both girls are quite well matched. Botelho's physicality could be the deciding factor, because Mueller, with it being quite slight, not having much power in her shots, she does struggle to put her stamp on rounds, whereas Botelho, her shots land with much more impact. So we see it in MMA all the time. If Mueller lands a nice 3-punch combo, but then, you know, Botelho gets a huge head kick that lands with a lot of snap and impact and gets a reaction from the crowd, one Botelho's power strikes might trump 3 of Mueller's pitter-patter, you know, combinations. And I disagree with that. I think that's a big weakness in MMA scoring. We see it happen all the damn time. So from a betting perspective, if we look at the odds, and wow, you can kind of see the odds updating there already a week out. The odds are moving as we speak. We can see that Botelho is currently round about an average of, call it 1.63, which is minus 159 for an implied probability of 61%. And then if we look at Lauren Mueller, she's currently around about an average of 2.35, which is plus 135 for an implied probability of 43%. So again, just like the last fight, these betting sites have done a really good job. I think the odds are spot on here, guys. I understand why Botelho is the favourite. I would make Botelho the favourite just because I think her physicality could be a big deciding factor in this matchup. She also has the power strikes and the physicality to put a better stamp on rounds. You know, if the rounds are close, Botelho is likely to have the bigger moments, which could sway the judges, because Mueller, not really having that much power in her hands, struggles to put a stamp on rounds. And also, just because we haven't seen Botelho's boxing doesn't mean she doesn't have any hands. And also, if the fight did go to the ground in a crazy scramble, based on how bad and how vulnerable Mueller looked in her last fight against Yanan Wu, even though I can't back it up with evidence, I would give Botelho the edge. So I think the odds are roughly accurate on this fight, guys. I wouldn't bet it, and that's okay. At the end of the day, it's not going to be easy to make money from gambling. The majority of the time, these bookies are going to get the odds right. It's their job. Their business depends on it, and that is why it's very important to be selective. It's important not to force bets and try and hunt for value where there isn't any. If you research a fight and determine that there's just no value, move on and don't put too much energy into thinking about it. Don't gamble. Don't risk putting your money in a bad position. Only ever put your money in strong positions, and there is no strong position to put your money on this fight. But who knows? Maybe there'll be some decent prop bets come out if you really want to bet this fight. So don't forget, guys, that is it for today. But if you do want to see me put out that live stream video on fight day 2 or 3 hours before UFC 236, it'll go live on YouTube, where I will try and find a prop bet for every single one of these matchups, and I will also answer all your questions from the live chat box. So if you want to see that video, guys, hit the like button below. We need to get 150 likes on every video. And please, if you enjoy these videos, subscribe. They're getting loads of views, and I want to see all you guys subscribe to the channel so I can keep producing this content for you. But for today, guys, thank you very much, and I'll be back very soon with part 4. So take care and good night.
Too many thoughts on my mind, I can't sleep at night, so I just keep writing. I don't need no help, I don't need opinions, so don't waste my time then. I just been living online, my city don't show me no love, and that's fine. Fuck local radio stations, I got more plays than all of these rappers combined. I'm going again, I've been going in, I'm fed up with so many things, I gotta just let it all out. I'm talking about the shit they've been talking about.